So hi everybody, good afternoon. If you don't already know me, my name is Agustina and I'll walk you through the open webinar today, which is focused on Max Phonics specifically.
Okay.
As you know, Max Phonics has its online components, which are the ones that your students are probably using the most, where they go into the program, they go into a module, they have groups of sounds, and they go through the lesson that the computer takes them through. After every few steps in the lesson, they always have an assessment, quiz, a few questions that they have to answer. And then based on their mastery, meaning whether they get those questions right or wrong, they're allowed to move on or they're brought back to review. Now, what we're going to focus on today is how to do pretty much the equivalent of what the students see on the online lesson, how to do that offline. So I'm going to show you what materials you can access on your teacher side, what materials you might have already that your school or district has purchased for you. And if you don't have these materials, I'm going to give you workarounds to still be able to do the lesson plan, even if you might not have the exact materials that I'm holding up, because it will be very important and very meaningful for your students that you supplement the online component with some offline, direct, guided instruction. That's really what's going to make the difference. That's what will help you fill in the gaps that the software might leave. You might see students, especially now if you have students that are working remotely, that master things that in the practice you don't think that they've mastered. So these offline lessons are the opportunity for you to expand on the strategies, on the lessons, on the phonics specifically, which we'll focus on today, and also to focus more attention on the parts of the lesson that you want to focus on. This is also going to be very relevant for you if you teach higher grades. If you have a fourth grader, fifth grader, middle school, high schooler that needs the phonics, you might not want to put them on the software per se, but actually focus on you giving them the direct instruction. By you doing that, you're able to take off the parts of the lesson that are not going to be relevant at their level and focus on the parts of the lesson that will be relevant for them. Usually sound blending, reading sentences, writing, things like that. Whereas if you focus on the software or on the beginning parts of the lesson plan, you'll have letter tracing, which might be too basic for them. So pretty much by understanding the steps of the lesson plan and knowing how to maneuver them and what you need to do at every step of the way, you'll be able to adapt the lesson to different levels and to different students. So I'm showing you here my dashboard. Everyone here has access to the dashboard. And what I want to point your attention to is the material section. Once you click on the material section, you have different subsections or different tabs that you can access. And the first one is Max Phonics. The material that I'm mostly going to be focusing on today is this first file on the list. It's called Lesson Plan and includes the steps, instructions, template, and a sample of what these lesson plans look like. Keep in mind, this same lesson plan, these instructions, these templates, etc., will be relevant for all of the types of sounds that you might be working with. So you'll use this lesson plan for the alphabet, you'll use this lesson plan for the blends, and you'll use this same lesson plan for the digraphs. So let me start by going over this file. I already downloaded it to my computer. You can just click on it on your end and you'll get it on your end as well. And what this file has, I'll just briefly scroll through the pages. The first page is the steps that are involved in this lesson plan and the instructions of what you're supposed to do every step of the way. You might have noticed that if you have a version of this file from about a week ago, it looks slightly different. I updated it a bit, changed the wording a little bit so it's more clear for you, but in essence, it's the same as what you already have. So first page shows you the 9 steps and the instructions of how to deliver those steps of the phonics lesson plan, which again, you can use for the alphabet, for blends, or for digraphs. Following pages after that will show you a sample of what that lesson plan will look like. Meaning when you're ready to write your lesson for you to deliver it to your student, you're going to have like a script that you're reading off of. This lesson plan is your script. So you have a sample. This one specifically is for the group of sounds SRCKE. I'll go over each step. I just want to go over the file in general first. And then towards the end, this is all still the lesson plan sample. Towards the end, you'll have an empty template. This is the part of this file, the pages of this file that you can print out so that you can write your own lesson. And like I said, adapt it. If you don't need step 2, you can take off step 2. If you need to spend more time on step 4, then spend more time on step 4. This is your lesson plan to write. This is your lesson plan to conduct and deliver to your students. So I'll go back to the first page where we had the instructions, right? So I'll go through each of the steps. I'll read what's on the screen, explain to you a little bit, tell you what materials you're going to need for each step of the way. And like I said, give you a workaround if you don't have the materials that I'll be holding up. And then I'll give you, and I'll show you, I'll show you a few samples of different lesson plans that I've written for the alphabet, for the blends, and for the diagrams. So I'm going to start here with step 1. That is the visual kinesthetic drill. And here the instructions are that you should use sound cards to introduce each letter or sound. The reason that it says letter and sound, letter or sound, is because if you're working on the alphabet, you're working with letters. If you're working with the blends or the digraphs, you're working with sounds. Remember, this lesson plan applies to either of those. So you're going to use sound cards to introduce each letter or sound. You'll introduce the letter, picture, and the sound that it makes. You'll flip the card, the sound card, with each prompt while saying, and in quotation is what you say, this is the letter P, for example. You'll flip the card, as in panda. You'll flip the card again, and you'll say, it makes the sound P. So these are your sound cards, right? When you flip the card, that means that I do letter, picture, sound. This is the letter P, as in panda. It makes the sound P. Now, what happens if you don't have these exact sound cards? If you do, you've already seen them. You have, it looks like this, your entire deck. You have all the alphabet, all the blends, and all the digraphs here. Notice that I've separated them here with rubber bands for each group of sounds as they are presented in the software so that it's just easier for me to pull them up based on the lesson that I'm working with. So what happens when you don't have these? You'll always want to look at the number of the step of the lesson plan that you want to work with. The visual drill is step number 1. So if I go back to my dashboard, you'll see that there's several files that start with the number 1. All of those will be related to step 1 of the lesson plan. Everything that has the number 2 will be related to step 2 of the lesson plan. Everything that has the number 3 will be related to step 3, and so on. So everything that you'll need, most of the things that you'll need to fill in that lesson plan will be here, and you'll refer to the number of the step and the number of the file here. You'll notice that for some steps, there's several files, and for some steps, there isn't a file. That means that you come up with the part of the lesson plan, you come up with the content. We'll go over those parts as well. So for example, I need my sound cards for step 1, and I don't have these. So what I'll do is I'll refer to this file, visual drill, step 1, sound cards for modules 1 and 2. Those are the consonants and short vowels. Let me open that file for you. And you'll see that you'll have the P as in panda, the F as in fox. So you'll have the same letters and pictures that I have here. And you can print that out and make your own sound cards if you don't have them already. What you can do is print it out, cut it out, and on a regular index card, put the letter in the front, the picture in the back, and make your own deck of cards. I've seen some teachers do that so that they can give sound cards to their students, so that students have the cards to manipulate themselves. Otherwise, you can just make a set for yourself. But point is that for step one, where you introduce the letter, picture, sound, you use your sound cards or the replacement sound cards, let's say, that you can get from your teacher side from the material section. So for every step of this lesson, and especially steps 1 and 2, you'll always want to demonstrate things for your students first, then have them repeat whatever you just said or whatever you just introduced them to, repeat it back to you or do it along with you, and then have the students do it themselves. Say the sound themselves, say the name of the letter themselves. Remember, you'll always want to follow the format of the lesson of I do, we do, and then you do. So I'll do it first as the teacher. I'm going to show you how to say the letter, picture, sound. Then we'll do it together. And then I'll just ask you, what is the name of the letter? What is the name of the picture? And what is the sound that the letter makes? But that's going to be crucial throughout your lesson. Always demonstrate things, always model things. Then have the student work with you on it so you can still give them feedback. You can still monitor what they're doing. And then have the students do it independently. So once I do step 1 for the first letter in this lesson, let's assume that I'm starting with the P, I would go to step 2 for that same letter. Step 2 is the tactile drill. The tactile drill is where I'll show the students how to trace the letter, and then I'll have them trace it as well. If you see the instructions, I'm paraphrasing a little bit what it says there. You'll first start with big hand motion. So you're going to hold your finger in the air and you're going to trace the letter for them, and you're going to tell them how you're tracing it. For the P, you'll go down, up, and around. Notice that if you're facing the student or if you're sharing your webcam like this with your student, you'll want to take note and keep in mind that the students are seeing the flip version of what you're doing, right? So if I do the P like this, which is the right side for me, I'm teaching you reversals. I'm teaching you how to do it the opposite way. So be mindful and make sure that you trace it the right way for whoever is on the other end, for the student, or just turn your back and just trace it like this. Down, up, and around, and then you have the P. And here I would do once again the I do, we do, you do. First I show it to you, then I ask you to put your finger up and do it along with me, and then I'll just watch you doing it. As the students are tracing each of the letters, you'll want them to say out loud what they're doing, the movements that they're doing. So for the P, I would want to hear down, up, and around. That's the first part of the tactile drill, the big hand motions. Then you'll want to start narrowing it down, working on the finer motor drills. So what you can do is you have several options. You can use a Ziploc bag with paint in it, or shaving cream or hair gel. You can use a paper plate with rice or salt. Anything that the students can touch and feel some sort of texture as they're running their finger through it, and they end up seeing the letter being traced, is going to be of great help to them. So you have several options. Whatever is less messy is what you might want to do. And if you don't have any of those options available, you can just use the student's forearm to trace. I sometimes use the back of a book or a folder, and I just do down, up, and around. Anything that I'll run my fingers through and feel the texture of how I'm writing that letter. And then I'll narrow it down even more. I'll work on the finer motor drills of me holding a pencil and actually writing the letter. So all of those things are written out here on the instructions. But first, you'll do the air tracing, the sky writing. Then you'll do the tracing with a finger on a texture. And then you're going to do the students actually writing those letters on a paper, on a notebook, whatever it is that you're working on. And remember, you always do the I do, then we do, then you do. Now, after I do steps 1 and 2 for the first letter in this group of sounds being the first one on the alphabet based on the computer, and that is the P, F, N, T, A. So for every letter in this group, I'm going to do steps 1 and 2. So I'll do steps 1 and 2 for the P, steps 1 and 2 for the F, steps 1 and 2 for the N, steps 1 and 2 for the T, and steps 1 and 2 for the A, meaning I'll introduce letter, picture, sound, and then I'll do the tracing. That's why I kind of drew a line below the 2, because those first 2 steps are done for each of the letters individually before I move on to any of the steps below. So once I do that, I would go to step 3, and that is the sound dictation. What I need to do here is dictate 10 letters or sounds to the students in random order. I'll introduce or I'll include any of the sounds that I've mastered or that the students have mastered or covered up until that point. And once again, in quotation marks, you'll see the wording that you should use. In this case, write the letter that makes a sound T, as in taxi. And then I'll have the students write it down, the letter T. And then I'll do another random letter from this group. Write the letter that makes a sound N, as in nurse. Then the students will write the N on, again, their notebook, the worksheet that you might give them. I'll talk about worksheets in a little bit. And that's what step 3 is, pretty much exposing them or telling them, prompting them with the sounds and the letters and the connecting words that you've taught them on steps 1 and 2, and see if they can recognize the proper letter, the proper sound, and write it down. Then we move on to step 4, that is the sound blending or tapping. And here it says you will use alpha chips or finger tapping to have students form words and nonsense words. This is to help them combine all those sounds that you've been covering up until this point that you've been introducing to them. Now let's put those sounds together. So they will tap each chip. The alpha chips look like this. If you have them, you probably got a little bag that has all the letters of the alphabet. And if I was forming words like this, let's say the word pat, obviously this is easier if you have a table to work on, but if it's the word pat, I would tap each of the chips as I sound out each letter, and then I would blend those into a word. I would trace a line to blend those together. So I would do at, pat. And then you can switch letters. You can ask them to form different words. For example, tap, and I would do t-ap, tap. The instructions say that you can use alpha chips or finger tapping. Finger tapping is this. You'll do one tap of touching one finger with your thumb, for each letter or for each sound. So if the word is pat, I'll do p, at, and then I'll run my fingers to form that word, pat. If the word is tap, I'll do t, ap, tap. And that way, even if I don't have the alpha chips, remember I said there's always a workaround, I can still do the blending and tapping.
Augustina.
You can do. Hi, Dina, how are you?
Hi, good. Can I ask just a quick question?
Go ahead.
So twofold. So when you are tapping towards the kids, you're doing it in left to right progression that you see it. So tap. But to the kids, the progressions turn backwards, right? So should you purposely use your other hand so that they're seeing it left to right? You know what I'm saying? Like if I use my left hand, you see left to right. If I use my right hand, you see right to left as the student. I'm just curious what your
feedback. That's a very good point. Okay. That's a very good point. Usually the finger tapping I have the students do. I don't usually do them. I usually use either my sound cards to show the words or the combination of letters to form the words, or the alpha chips. However, this is kind of like what I was mentioning on step 2 for the tactile drill, that if I do it like this, I'm showing you reversal. Correct. So you might want to either use your left hand. I'm not so good with that. So you might just want to do it on the side like this. Tap, tap. Okay. But this is more for the student to do.
Okay. And you called them alpha chips. So we don't have them. Can you, is that a standard name? Like I could put that into Amazon and we can find them, or is that just your name for them?
Letter chips. Okay. Anything like that. Okay. I know that many teachers buy at the dollar store poker chips, and then you just put a sticker and with Sharpie. Yeah. Okay. Anything works. You can find your workarounds as long as you have the tactile component, the touching, the tapping. That is what helps the students. How you do it, what materials exactly, doesn't really make the biggest difference.
Okay, thanks.
All righty. Okay, so that's for the sound blending and tapping. What I'm going to do, though, is use any of the letters that I've mastered up until this point. I'm focusing on the PFNTA group of sounds. That's the first group of sounds introduced in the phonics. So I just have those 5 letters to use. But keep in mind, as you move to other groups of sounds, you can use any of the sounds that you've mastered. So when I move on to the SRCKE, which is the second group of sounds, when I'm doing the sound blending and tapping, I can do or use or mix the SRCKE and the PFNTA. I'm constantly adding more and more sounds to my bank of sounds. For this part of the lesson, for step 4, there isn't a material on the material section. Remember I said there would be something for every step, for most steps. So for step 4, there isn't anything. That's because you come up with the words and nonsense words for that part of the lesson off the top of your head. We don't have a template for it. You just come up with whatever letters you're working with, you mix and match those sounds. Then we get to step 5, which is the fluency. This is one that will not be more complex, but it'll take you a little more time because this is an exercise that you need to do with each student individually. The fluency drill is something that is very, very individual to each student. On this exercise, we're assessing or testing or seeing how many words my students can read, each of the students can read in 60 seconds. So this is to help assess and improve eventually their automaticity when reading. The instructions say that you'll use the list of words to time each student for 60 seconds. You'll keep track of how many words they read, how many mistakes they make, and at the end, you're gonna give them credit only for the words that they read correctly. So here I stumble into something else that I don't know what it is. What is the list of words? So remember, I'll look at the number of the step and I'll see what supporting materials I may have on the materials section. And for the fluency specifically, there's a lot. You'll see that there's a lot of documents here that start with the number 5. You'll have several things. You'll have an explanation of how to do the fluency properly, why it's important to do it. You'll have a file showing you expectations of how many words your students should be reading at different points throughout the school year, at different grade levels. You'll have charts where you can track their scores, these scores that you're going to give them every time. You can use these charts or different files that we've offered you here to keep track of that. You can even share that with parents later on, keep it on the student's folder. And you have the word lists. So if I'm working with the PFNTA, I would refer to the fluency word list for module 2 for the PFNTA. It looks like this. And here I would have my students read those words as many times as they can in 60 seconds, starting from the top left and going over the first row, second row, third row, fourth row, etc. If they reach the last word and they still have time on the clock, I'm gonna have them start over again. So this is something that teachers get confused with sometimes. This is not to see how long it takes them to read all these words. It's to see how many words they can squeeze into that minute that I'm timing them on. If this is too much for your students, let's say you're working with kindergartners, this might be too much. So you might want to make a shorter fluency list. You might want to practice it with them a few times. Remember the I do, we do, you do component of your lesson. So what you'll want to do is read it with them, have them read it back to you when you're not timing them, just for practice purposes. And then finally, when they've had some practice under their belt, once they've had some demonstration from you, reading those words and starting over from the top, as long as you have time, then you can actually have them do it and give them a score with how many words they read correctly. What are considered errors? Errors are words that I mispronounce, when I confuse letters or words for another, words that I spend too much time trying to read or that I'm trying to decode. That's not what this exercise is about. This is about reading quick. And if I make a mistake, but then I correct it right away, then I'll count that as a correct word. But at the end of the 60 seconds, bottom line is that you'll give them credit, you'll give them points, and those points will be how many words they read correctly. And I have a question on the chat box. When I feel that it will apply to multiple people, I'll read it out loud. If not, I'll just reply privately. But here I have a question. Should I just do steps 1 through 3 for pre-K? Yes. Pre-K, you actually have the software version of it in module 1. And that is actually all that there is on the software, is steps 1 to 3. So yes, if you're doing pre-K, you're just going to do letter introduction, sound introduction, the picture association, and then dictating the sounds to make sure that they can distinguish one from another. But on pre-K, both offline and in the software, you're not going to have the sound blending, the fluency, the side words, all of those things. So yes, that's where you'll stick to, what you'll stick to if you're doing pre-K. From kindergarten and above, you'll do all of the steps. You can adapt it, of course, but you can do all of the steps. So back to my steps and my lesson. Next step is side words. Side words we introduce in index cards. So this is another one of the materials that you'll have. This, I assume all of you have. We don't have a pre-made set. So it's just index cards that I've written on with a red Sharpie. Why a red Sharpie and not black letters like I have here? That's because side words are different than words that I can tap and sound out, right? Side words, I just need to look, memorize, read them. I need to just read them by looking at them, side words. So we write them in a different color. The way that we'll introduce them is not by sounding them out, of course, but by spelling this. Is there somebody unmuted? Was there a question? I'll just mute everyone again because I hear the background noise. And if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. So here what we'll do is that we'll spell the word. So we'll do, this is the word had, H-A-D, had. For the side words, you'll definitely want your students to make their own deck of side words so that they can have their personal cards to review and keep adding more and more with each lesson. A good goal of how many side words you should do is anywhere between 5 to 15 per lesson. So on the lower end, do 5. If you can challenge your students, do 10, 15, more if you can. Another way that you can do the sight words. Let's say you forgot your index cards. You have your arm. And we're going to do another form of tapping. It's not going to be this tapping that we did, because this tapping is when I'm sounding out letters and blending them into a word. This tapping is where I'm spelling. And I'm going to use my entire arm, and I'm going to do 1 tap per letter. So if my word is had, I would do H-A-D, had. If my word is was, I'm going to do W-A-S, was. Remember, anything that's tactile, moving, touching, tapping, really helps the information shoot and stick to the brain. And Gina, you asked an important question. Is there an order to teach the side words, or a specific order of which side words you should introduce with each group of sounds? The answer is no, especially because you can do this lesson plan with different grades, with different types of students. What you do have on the material section is a suggested list of side words that is based on the Dolch list. And let me just show you where it is. The side words is step 6. So I would look for number 6 here. And you have here the suggested list. It has about, I want to say maybe 600 words. So you can have an idea of which ones you might want to introduce. If you want to stick to the ones that are in the software so that you go exactly along with the software, you have those here as well. So you can download the side words that are in the software for modules 2, 3, and 4, and then do one by one the words on the software and the words on the lesson plan. I personally suggest that you don't follow along exactly with the software, that you build up more side words, more sentences, more control readers. Always try to take it a little bit further so that the students don't just memorize what the software had, but you're actually reaching a little bit more and trying to make sure that all these skills are covered and mastered on the student's end. Back to the lesson plan. We move on to step 7, that is the spelling dictation. This is actually a step that is not on the software. So far, everything that I've talked about, there's an equivalent, similar at least, step that is built into the software. This step, steps 7 and 8 actually, those are not in the software. Those are just added skills or added steps or added exercises that you do on your guided lesson. For step 7, what I'll do is I'll choose 10 words from the word list that I use for the fluency drill, and I'll dictate them to the students. The students will write them down on paper. So it can be the same words that I told them to tap and blend, but this time they're not tapping and blending. This time they're holding a pencil and writing that word. Then step 8 is a sentence dictation. If you teach kindergarten, this may be too challenging for your students. They might not be ready for it. Those are the type of situations where you might want to skip a step. Whereas if you teach the higher grades, that might be the opposite. Maybe this is one of the steps that you want to focus on. Maybe you want to tell your students to come up with their own sentences using the sight words that you just gave them, using the sounds or the letters that were taught in this lesson. But fact is, what we'll do on step 8 is we'll dictate or work on 5 to 10 sentences that the students will write on a paper or notebook. For this step, there's also, there isn't a document on the material section because you'll come up with those sentences. Like I said, I like coming up with new things in addition to what the software already shows my students.
Where is the mute?
So I'm gonna use, don't worry, I'll mute you. So I'll always do more side words, more sounds, more sentences, different control readers. I'll do it a little bit. I'll make it my own so that it really applies to my students and their needs and their skill set. And then we have the last step, which is the control readers. The control readers is that story that comes at the end. Here, I like coming up with my own stories. And if you wanted to use the ones in the software, again, you can go into the material section and you will have the stories that are in the software, but I like coming up with my own stories. You'll read the story for your students, and then you'll give them a chance to read them back to you. Remember, for every step here, we're gonna want to always demonstrate for the students what we want them to do, demonstrate how to tap, demonstrate how to trace, demonstrate the letter, picture, sound, and then do it with them. You can still monitor, you can still give them feedback, you can still correct them, and then have them do it on their own. So now that we went through all of the steps, I want to show you a few samples of lesson plans that I've already written out. And I'm going to send those to you. I usually don't share them unless you've been to my other trainings, but let me pull it up. And it's right here. So what I did is I took that empty template that is part of that document that I was going through with the steps. If you keep scrolling through, you're going to bump into that empty template with a bunch of empty boxes. So what I did is I took this, I put it on another document, and I just started writing different lesson plans. The first one that I have here is for the PFNTA. So I added the letter and the picture just so that I have it as my kind of cheat sheet of what words are and pictures are associated with each letter in this group. I'm just muting everybody left and right. If you have questions, go ahead and use the chat box just because I get confused. I don't know if people are asking things. So remember that we'll do steps 1 and 2 for each letter. So I have the P as in panda, it makes a sound P. And here I wrote down how I'm supposed to trace the letter, down, up, and around. Then I'll do the F as in fox, and it makes a sound F. And for that, I would write half around, down, and across. Remember, I do steps 1 and 2 for each letter. And what I write in this boxes is pretty much my cheat sheet so that I don't have to constantly go back to the materials and download all the things. I look at them once as I'm writing the lesson, and then I go off my lesson plan, and that's it. So here I made a quick note. Like I just said, steps 1 and 2 are done for each letter before moving on to further steps. Then we have step 3. That's where I dictate the sounds. Here I did half of it and I left the other half undone. So I filled in 5 of those boxes with, in a random order, all of the letters that I've introduced to my students so far in this lesson plan. The remaining 5 boxes, the ones that say complete, 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 I would put the same letters in a different order. My students on their end, they would be writing down those letters that I'm dictating. Lauren asked if this is all you do for pre-K. So your lesson plan for pre-K would be this page. This is where it ends. You might want to do some extra exercises. Let's find more words that start with the P. Let's draw pictures of those words. You can, of course, expand it a little bit, but on the template that we give you, this is where it would end. Steps 1, 2, 3. Then when we get to step 4, these are the words that I came up off the top of my head, combining all those letters that I've learned in this lesson into words and nonsense words. Here is where I want my students to tap and blend, or tap and blend with my alpha chips. Another option that you have, I just took index cards and I just wrote letters with black Sharpie. And then you can use these, or the students can use this to tap and blend if you don't have the alpha chips. This might be a good idea if your students are remote. You might want to have them get index cards and just make their own deck of cards, and it's going to be easier for them to manipulate. And then I just wrote 5 words here. All of the rest of the boxes I would fill in with similar words. Then on the fluency, remember that you do that individually with each of your students. You'll give them the word list and you're going to give them credit with how many words they read correctly. So you're not going to fill in this part prior to you doing the lesson. You're going to fill it in after you time each of the students. So I read 25 words per minute. That's what WPM means. Then we get to step 6, side words. They're in red. For each of the words that I wrote down, I would have an index card. And for each of those, I would have my students make their own index card. And for each of those, I would do the arm tapping where I'm spelling each of those words. Remember, finger tapping is for words that I sound out and blend. Arm tapping is for words that I spell, sight words. Then we get to step 7. These are words that I dictate for my students to write down. Notice that I use the same words that I had on step 4. That's because I'm still working with the same group of sounds. I'm still forming those words. But on step 4, my students are just tapping and blending. On step 7, they're hearing those words and writing them down. So it's different skills, same words. You can change the order, of course, but they're writing it at this point. Then step 8 is the sentence dictation. I put a few examples, easy sentences. If you're working on this type of lesson with a higher grade student, you might want to make more complex sentence structures, of course, use higher vocabulary. But here you'll dictate the sentence, the students will repeat them. They're gonna count how many words are in the sentence. All of this is written out in the instructions. I'm just kind of sampling and going through an overview of the steps. And then last is the control readers, which again, you can use the ones on the software. I like coming up with my own. So I use the sentences that I wrote here, the words that I dictated here, the side words. So I use my own lesson plan to build my lesson plan, if that makes sense. I use my side words to include in the sentences. I use my sentences to include in the story. So it kind of all falls into place. It all ties in together that way. So this is a sample of the PFNTA. I see a question. Let me read it out loud. Are the letters on the cards written backwards too, or do they show correctly when using Zoom? Good question. You tell me. Do you see it the right way? That I'm not sure. I never thought about that.
I see it the right way.
Okay, so let's assume that you can see it the right way. And Gina, you had a question about the sentence dictation?
I did. So you're using only the sight words that you've presented to them, and of course the letters to create the other words, like I pat the cat, yeah. Obviously I and the. So is your focus there more on the words that you're focusing on the letters? Because the sight words, if he gets the wrong, you can just continue to address it, right? You really want to make sure that they're getting the other words correct.
The letter combination of the letters that you're teaching now. Okay. And you're not, or you might not exclusively use the side words and the words that were in this lesson, because you're going to be very limited, especially when it's the PFNTA. When you move on to further lessons, it's easier because you have more sounds and more side words to choose from, but you don't have to just stick to those. Okay. Obviously, your students know more side words. They know more vocabulary, right? So you can incorporate those as well. If you have a word of the week, incorporate the word of the week into this. You don't have to restrain yourself to just the things that are in this lesson. I do like to make sure that at least the things that are in this lesson appear in the sentence.
And then what's your criteria to move them out of the group? Like, how do you know that they're ready to go? Is there is 80%, 85%? Like, what's your criteria to say?
For the phonics, yeah. Well, when we think about the software, it's 100%. Otherwise, okay. I'm not going to be allowed to move on. Okay. When I'm doing the direct lesson, I focus on different things. I'm focusing on, are they making the sounds correctly, which the software doesn't address? Is the fluency improving? Are they able to recognize the sounds and the words that I'm dictated to them? So in that case, I don't need 100% accuracy. I would say 80% is good enough for me to consider that you're good with this group of sounds and we can move on to the next.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, like you said, there's things that you always can improve on. The side words, that's why you want the students to have their own deck so that they can go and review the side words by themselves. You don't have to hold up the entire group for misspelling of one word here and there. Okay. So that's my sample for the PFNTA. Same exact thing I did here with the SRCKE. But notice that before I start a new lesson, I'm going to always review letters or sounds that I learned or done before. In this case, this is the second group of sounds of the alphabet based on the software. So I'm gonna reinforce or review the previous one, the PFNTA. A good way to review is take your sound cards, mix them up, and ask the student, what's the name of the letter? What's the name of the picture? What's the sound that it makes? What's the name of the letter? What's the name of the picture? What's the sound that it makes? So this can be your little review. Do they still recognize the letter, picture, sound? You can do some of the blending of the sounds, since remember that at this point, I'm going to be using the SRCKE and the PFNTA. So I need to make sure that they still can blend those at least together. So you might want to do the cards and some sound blending. You might want to do some tracing as well. But after you do the review, then you go back to the same steps that we just went over, the same 9 steps, but for different letters, different keywords, of course, different instructions on how to trace the letters. And then I'll do the SRCKE on my dictation, and I can add the PFNTA if I wanted to on the remaining boxes because I've mastered those already. So they're part of my bank of sounds. Here on the sound blending and tapping, notice that I used letters from the SRCKE and the PFNTA. So I'm going to use the short E and the short A. On the fluency, I left it blank. I haven't worked on this with my students, so I don't have their scores yet. I added more and different side words. I repeated the words. This time they're going to write them down. And then my sentences, and then my story. Same idea with the BGMLI. This time I'm going to review all the prior list of sounds, PFNTA, SRCKE, and then we're on to the next lesson. Same thing. And I'm going to share this with you so you'll have at least 3 of the 5 lesson plans for the alphabet. The other ones I'll let you do. And now I want to show you what this lesson plan looks like for the next module, for blends. That's module 3 on the software. And here, Gina, it connects to what you asked. Notice that here I actually marked in bold the words that I'm going to be holding them accountable for. So it's the words that have the sounds that I'm learning in this lesson. So here, this means that I'm moving on to another module. This is the blends. So this time when I'm going to review previous sounds, I'm not going to go through all of the letters in the alphabet, right? I've reviewed letters after each of the lessons before. So here I could just review specific sounds. Those are the students struggle with. In my case, I focus on the short vowels because that's important. I'm going to be using those constantly on the blends and the digraphs. And then I would move on to my steps. The steps are the exact same. Only at this point, your wording will change a little bit because you're introducing two letters that make a sound. So when I'm saying this is the letter, this is a picture, this is the sound, I change the wording a little bit. These are the letters BR, as in broom. It makes a sound brr. So the wording changes, the step is the same. You need your sound cards, you can find them on the materials section. You need instructions on how to trace the letters, you don't know them off the top of your head, you go to your materials section and you have them there. Here I filled in all the boxes of the words that the sounds, that I would dictate. Here are the words that I would have my students blend, the scores that I gave them for the fluency drill, all the side words that I'll introduce. I assume that this is a more advanced group of students, so I'll do the whole 15. I'll spell those words or dictate those words so that they write them down. My sentences, you can see they're a little bit more advanced here. And my story uses some of the words, some of the side words, some of the sentences that I had in this lesson. Again, the steps are the same. The content is a little different because you're dealing with different sounds. Now let me show you a sample of the digraphs. Digraphs is module 4. Once again, I chose to review the short vowel sounds. I have my digraphs that I'm covering in this lesson, how to write them, the sounds that I'll dictate, and the same things once again. Here, a difference is that when you're doing the tapping, you'll do one tap per digraph. So if you're doing shed, you will do sh, ed, shed. Okay, that's the only real difference here. For the side words, I'll still do the arm tapping and my index cards. At this point, if you can challenge your students on the sentence dictation, you might want to come up with 5 that you're going to dictate to them and have them come up with the other 5. Have them come up with a story using the words that they wrote down on that lesson. And now the last thing that I add in here is something that I recently did, which pretty much shows what your students' work can look like. What does that mean? On multiple places, I had the students write things, right? I was dictating things and they were writing it somewhere. So what I did is I made a sample of what the student's end might look like. So I listed all the 9 steps and what the student needs to do. So I'll share with you this Word document that I made. This is something that you can give the student, and that way the student can follow step by step all the parts of the lesson. For example, on step 1, name the letters, the picture, and make the sound shown in the card. What card? The one that you're holding up for them, the one that you're demonstrating how to do. On step 2 is where we need to trace the letters first in the sky, then on a surface, and then write it down. So I just made a table where they can write the letters. On step 3, I'm dictating the sounds that I want them to write. I just made a table where they can write it themselves. So this is like a worksheet that you can actually hand to the students to write all these things that you want them to write. On step 4, that's where we're tapping and blending. So use alpha chips or finger tapping to blend the sounds into words. Step 5 is this fluency. Read the list of words. I went ahead and copied the list of words so that they have it in front of them and they can just read off their own page. Step 6, write the side words. Ooh, went too far. Write the side words in red inside index cards. So I'll dictate the words, I'll show them how to tap them and blending, and I want them to write them down. Step 7 is the word dictation. Write the words that you hear, and you would be dictating quilt, chess, chip, and this is the student writing it down. Step 8, these are the sentences that I dictated for the student. I'm going to make sure that they're capitalizing, that they're spelling correctly, little things there. And then on step 9, I gave them the story that I wrote, and I just want them to read it. So this is, again, what would be the student's version of this lesson plan. If you want to use this template that I made, let me see if I can quickly find it here. I'll share it with you, and then you can edit it. It's a Word document, so you can just edit it and make it your own, add things, remove things. And it's going to be a good resource to you, a good tool for you to have to give to the student. So here, this is the actual template. So you can print it out, give it to your students, and that's how they follow along the lesson. And then you'll have a portfolio of their actual work. This is what you might want to use to score them and determine if you're allowing them to move on or not. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show you on my end. We have about 5 minutes off of the scheduled time. I'm going to open the floor for questions. If there aren't any, you're free to go about your day. Remember, I will be sharing the recording with you tomorrow, as well as every document that I share. Yes, Gina.
So my question is the controlled reader section. I guess you're gonna, monitor what words they're getting incorrect, but is it possible for them to get 100% in the software working with the letter or the blend or the digraph, but you're still seeing mistakes with the in the controlled reader? So would you not move them then ahead, even though the software
yes,
right? You would still.
And that is precisely why it's important that you do these lesson plans, because that's what will allow you to catch those things. Sure. Otherwise, the software is going to keep moving them on. But remember, the software is just measuring the accuracy of their clicks. It's not measuring how they're reading, their fluency. There's a lot of things that are left to you, the teacher, to do on this lesson plan. And those are the things that you'll focus mostly on. If you see a student that mastered all of the letters on the software, and even when they're with you, they fly through those, then what you want to focus on is probably the sound blending, probably the sight words, and the controlled readers, so that you focus on the things that they need past the software to complement the software.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Feel free to ask. I think there's one on the chat box. No, it was just a thank you. Thank you for attending. Okay, and I see a question which is important about the progress monitoring. I'm going to set up an extra session. I know that if you guys are here, it's because you received my invitation to the open webinars in the following months. I'm going to throw in an extra session for the reports and the progress monitoring in case you haven't attended previous ones, because it will take a while to cover, so I don't want to rush through it. But I'll gladly send you the invite, Barbara, and whoever wants it. I'll send it to everyone once again. So if you received this one, you'll receive the next one for the progress monitoring and the reports, which are kind of the same but different because they show you different things. One is a report of usage. The other one is a report of growth, growth meaning mastery in this case. So I'll probably do that the first few days of February, I want to say. I'm going to come up with a date and I'll send it all. Before the end of the week, you'll get an invite.
And will you be doing a training like this for max words, like where you're going through the lesson plan? Was that in?
No, I'm not sure. I don't have the calendar here, but yes, it's either the next one or the following.
Right, it is in the list. Okay, that's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah, it is on the list. Yeah, I'm actually going to do 2 of max words because there's several modules there. So I'm going to do one for each of the first 2 modules, Clover and spelling rules.
Awesome, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of known names. Hi, Miss Salinas. How are you? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. Miss Salinas, you're muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk to me, but you're muted.
There you go. Okay. You hi, nice to finally meet you. I've been talking to you for like 2 years.
This is a face to the emails and phone calls.
Yes. You look like Augustine.
Right? Kind of look like her. All right, so I'll stop the recording, you guys. I'll still stay on for a few minutes, so if you have questions, feel free to ask me on the chat. I don't want to hold you up if you have to go. You will be getting the recording, and like I said, all the documents tomorrow. You already have my contact information. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions that come up along the way, if you need any help. And like I said, before the end of the week, you'll get an invite to this reports session that I'm going to hold. Okay.
Is there a time difference between you and Texas over here? Because I think I missed the whole thing.
Yeah, you just joined?
Yes, because it was at 3:30. So the next time.
So I'm an hour ahead of you.
An hour ahead. So that way I'll know next time.
Yes.
Okay.
I missed it too.
Oh, sorry. Well, you'll get the recording, so you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to forward the parts that you don't want to listen to me anymore.
Okay, well,
that might be better for you.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for joining.
You're welcome.